OK. Nous pouvons certainement être inspirés par plusieurs initiatives de la base et communautaires qui existent à travers le Canada et autour du monde, alors que nous repensons notre modèle économique dominant et tentons de répondre à des questions plus larges de démocratie. Nos prochains orateurs parleront d'une entente de collaboration impressionnante et révolutionnaire qui met au défi la façon dont nous percevons traditionnellement le développement économique et l'emploi en Amérique du Nord. Nous avons avec nous ce soir Michael Peck et Ken Delaney de l'initiative conjointe entre la plus grande coopérative du travail au monde et le plus grand syndicat industriel de l'Amérique du Nord. Je suis ravie de demander à John Anderson, directeur des affaires gouvernementales et de politique publique à l'Association des coopératives du Canada, de vous présenter Michael and Ken. John, welcome.
So thank you very much, Denise. And we're really pleased to have Michael and Ken here to talk about this groundbreaking project. This is very important both to the cooperative sector. It's very important to many people in this room. First of all, I'd like to introduce Michael Peck, who's Mondragon's North American delegate. He's headquartered in Washington, D.C. Michael was also a representative of Gamesa, a Spanish manufacturer of state-of-the-art wind turbines that recently partnered with the United Steelworkers in opening 2 plants in Pennsylvania by converting shut-down steel plants and hiring hundreds of workers to produce new green energy turbines. And this is exactly the kind of project that we would like to see happening in Canada. Ken Delaney is the assistant to the United Steelworkers Union, national director for Canada, and is also currently the co-chair of the Blue-Green Canada, an alliance between the United Steelworkers and Environmental Defense to support the development of good green jobs as part of a new green economy. Ken was also the Chief Executive Officer for the First Ontario Fund, which merged with GrowthWorks Canadian Fund in 2006. And many years ago, I worked with Ken when I worked at the Ontario Federation of Labour, and Ken was also one of those responsible for the worker buyout at Algoma Steel and for saving that industry in Sault Ste. Marie. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Michael and Ken to come up here, and we're looking forward to a very interesting presentation. And I think this is really something groundbreaking in terms of the possibilities for a people-centered economy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John, for those kind words. Most of what you said is remotely close to the truth. I'm going to talk a little bit tonight about why we entered into this agreement with Mondragon and a little bit about unions and co-ops generally. And for me, my thinking on this really started close to 25 years ago when I was sitting around, I was with Leo Girard, who was now the president of the Steelworkers Union, then the Canadian National Director, and we were in a hotel, we were negotiating collective agreements, and when you're in bargaining, there's lots of dead time, times when you're waiting for the other side to come back. So we were sitting around, and Leo was reading the newspaper, and there was a guy at the time named Chainsaw Dunlop, who was a corporate raider in the United States. The name alone will tell you a lot. And this was, don't forget, this is around the time of Oliver Stone's movie Wall Street. This particular event would have been just before that. So Leo's reading about this stuff and he turns to me and says, okay, you're the numbers guy. How come when a company lays off a bunch of workers, the stock price goes up? And I said, well, I guess that's a reflection of the view that the buyers of those stocks, stockbrokers and pension funds, have about the value of that share. And I think the understanding behind that is that if a company in those days, the jargon was cutting back to core business, that if a company is cutting back to its core business and shedding excess, superfluous things like workers, that's going to increase profits in the long term. So he kind of moved on, and then a minute later he said, well, how does this work? So if I want to buy a share of Stelco or of Inco, how do Stelco and Inco get that money? And I said, well, they're probably not going to get that money. You're actually going to buy it on the secondary market from a stockbroker. You're going to buy it from somebody else that owns it. So your money will go to the previous owner, not to the company. So he said, well, wait a minute. So you're telling me that this guy, Chainsaw Dunlop, comes in, lays off the people that makes the products on behalf of people that he doesn't know, that he's never met, and have actually never given their money directly to the company. Yeah, I guess it is something like that. So that was the first time that we really started to talk about corporate governance, corporate structure, and what we might look for if we were looking for something different. So it's a pleasure to be here at a conference called the People-Centered Economy. We like to think that we've been pushing society towards a more people-centered economy for some time. We do that through collective bargaining. We do that through improving health and safety, improving equality in the workplace, by lobbying for progressive policies, better employment insurance, better Canada pension plan, etc. We're also a fairly big diversified organization. We've been hit hard in the recession now, so we're down to about 700,000 members across North America, about 25% of those in Canada. But no matter what sector of the economy you're in, chances are you're going to come across some steel workers. Our biggest bargaining unit in Canada actually are the employees at the University of Toronto. So we're very diverse. So we've been intrigued by this question of corporate design based on our dissatisfaction with the Chainsaw Dunlop method of running corporations for some time. And we've experimented with employee ownership. John mentioned Algoma Steel. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute. That was a big project for us. We've also experimented with labor-sponsored investment funds. I ran one myself for 10 years. And now we're experimenting with Mondragon. And it is very much an experiment, but it's one that we're very excited about because there's a lot of things about the way that corporations are currently structured that we don't like, and a lot of problems that we've got. One, of course, is excessive compensation. I understand the average compensation for the CEOs of Canada's top 100 paid CEOs was about $7.3 million in 2008. That's 174 times greater than the average Canadian. There's also a question of lack of commitment to the community. We recently had a dispute with U.S. Steel. U.S. Steel bought Stelco, and it included a plant in Hamilton and a plant in Nanticoke on Lake Erie. Purchase occurred about 3 years ago. They made certain representations to the Canadian government at that time that had to approve the investment, that they would hit certain production levels and certain employment levels for a minimum period of time. Well, when the economic crisis hit in 2008 and credit markets tightened up, they decided that unilaterally that just changed the rules, and they shut down the facility and they laid off people and they violated the agreement, and the Canadian government is now suing U.S. Steel for violations. There's also this issue of being unwilling to share profits. We are unfortunately engaged in a bitter dispute with Vale Inco in Sudbury. Vale is an enormously profitable company. Nickel prices are very high, over $10 a pound right now. Vale reported profits in the first quarter of this year of $1.6 billion, paid out $1.2 billion in dividends. And during that same quarter, the total payments to its employees worldwide was $424 million. So just sort of give you a little bit of perspective. Now, despite being very profitable, and despite being able to make all kinds of money at with the current collective agreement, they're seeking changes to the collective agreement to eliminate the pension plan for new hires and also to dramatically cut back on profit sharing. Now, this is real strange to us because for many, many years we were told profit sharing is what companies liked. That's what workers were supposed to be asking for, and Vale wanted to cut it back. On another commitment to the community story, Xstrata, just down the road in Timmins, recently decided to close the smelter and move it to a part of the world where environmental standards are a lot lower. One of their stated reasons were the high cost of complying with environmental regulation. So there's lots of reasons for us to be concerned about the way corporations are structured and the way they currently operate. So we were kind of intrigued with Mondragon. In its mission statement, Mondragon talks about competitiveness, certainly, but it also talks about being committed to the community. It talks about wealth creation, but it also talks about job creation. It talks about being committed to education, worker participation in management decisions. It talks about labor sovereignty, which I think means that recognition that workers own their own labor and the fruits of that labor. I'm not sure exactly what it means, but I kind of like the sound of it. It also talks about the subordinated nature of capital, or capital being subordinated to labor. Again, when it gets down to the specifics, I'm not sure what that means, but I definitely like the sound of that one. But it isn't just the philosophy that attracted us to Mondragon, to be truthful. It's also the fact that it's a very successful organization. Some 100,000 worker owners, members across the world in 40 countries, annual sales of some $20 billion, 250 enterprises. So to us, this was an opportunity. If we're going to experiment again with something new, this time cooperative ownership, this was a partner that certainly looked like a good one for us. So in October of 2009, we signed our alliance, and we agreed to do 4 things. We agreed to work together to try to increase participative one-class employee ownership. We agreed to try to figure out how to integrate collective bargaining practices with co-op principles. We agreed to explore new approaches to union management relations and cooperation in the workplace, and we agreed to try and explore co-investing models. So far, our activities have really focused on just 2 things: building support for the initiative and making connections, and Michael's been doing a lot of work on that, and then just the early stages of beginning to look for opportunities to transition traditional workplaces into co-ops using this model. He's going to tell you a little bit more about Mondragon's decision to open an office in the United States in the coming months through its consulting wing, LKS. And I think once they arrive, then the search for the first opportunity to transition will begin. How's my time? All right, then I will wrap up quickly, because I just want to tell you a little bit about Algoma Steel, because that is the first place that we tried a co-op, and I'll tell you a little story about it. Algoma was, and I may take 3 or 4. I hope that's okay. The Algoma Buyout took place in the early 90s. DeFasco owned Algoma Steel at the time. It was a tough time for the steel industry. Steel prices were very low. It was a crisis, and Algoma drifted into bankruptcy. Our objective really was to not necessarily to come out as worker owners, but to simply restructure the company in a way to save as many jobs as possible, while still having an economically viable entity. So DeFasco came up with its plan, and we didn't like it very much, because without putting a lot of capital in and with these massive concessions from the workers, they were going to get to own it again. And that didn't make a lot of sense to us, since we didn't think they were the ones that deserved to own it, since the workers and the creditors were actually going to be the ones that had to make all the sacrifices if Algoma was going to be saved. So we came up with our own plan, and our own plan included the workers taking a big pay cut. They had to do that because the only way to generate enough cash to modernize the mill was from cash flow. But in exchange for that, they would have to be the majority owners. The banks who were owed a lot of money had to take 50 cents on the dollar for their debt, but then in addition to that, they would get a big piece of ownership. DeFasco really almost had to pay to leave because they weren't in a position of strength, in our view. We wanted to make sure that workers had a voice. We knew we had to improve productivity, hence the CapEx plan, but we also included a co-op element to the buyout. and I know that there are many people here who work with co-ops. What we did was we separated the economic value of ownership from the political control elements of ownership. So we created a special class of shares which gave the workers the right to nominate its nominees to the board of directors, gave the workers collectively a veto over certain fundamental business decisions like closing the plant and moving production someplace else, those sorts of things. But those shares had no economic value. They were just the means by which the workers would control these fundamental issues. And that was held in a cooperative. The economic value, there were a separate class of Class A common shares that held the economic value. They were non-voting. It's a long story why we ended up that way, but what we really wanted to do was we wanted to make sure that the control elements stayed with the employees kind of forever. In the end of the day, it didn't work out that way because Algoma was bankrupt again and sold, but that was our thinking at the time. And when we took this to the banks and to the government and to Bay Street and tried to sell the idea of our plan, they liked all of it. The hardest sell was the co-op part. In fact, I'll never forget when we first introduced it to the mediator, the financial mediator that was brought into the negotiations by the government of Ontario. We were taking him through the various elements, and then he left this part of our plan to the end of the discussion. And he said to me, "Okay, Ken, now I want to talk to you about this co-op thing." And I said, "Okay." And then he looked at me and he said, "You know, Ken, the Berlin Wall fell a few years ago." And I said, "Yeah, I actually was aware of that. And we still want our co-ops." We hung out, hung in there and ultimately prevailed, and we were able to get it. But it was a bit of a lesson when you are doing corporate restructurings. Anything that's outside the box, anything that's not typical is that much harder sometimes to convince people of the merits of it. Anyway, I'll just close by saying that we were very pleased with the Algoma experience because we saved the mill. It is still there today. It's now owned by someone else because it was bankrupt again, and somebody came along with big bags of money and offered lots for it, and our worker owners sold their shares to the company at the time. They voted to do so. But the big lesson for us from Algoma and from everything else that we've gone through is that we too have to think outside the box. We've, I think, unfortunately come all too familiar with the failings of the marketplace and that the previous speaker spoke of and the need to change, but all of us, including I can say on behalf of trade unions, we've got to be more innovative as well. Now, we've tried to do that. We've tried to do that in the past with worker ownership. We've tried to do it with creating alliances with the environmental movement, with Blue Green Canada, and pushing for part of our Green Jobs agenda is really not only a transition to more renewable energy, but to make sure that those wind turbines and solar panels are manufactured here in Canada. So we've been trying to be innovative that way. And one of the ways in which we've hoped to demonstrate again that unions are capable of being innovative is by making our new alliance with Mondragon work. Thank you very much.
Bonsoir à tous, c'est un grand plaisir d'être ici parmi vous. Et heureusement pour vous, je ne vais pas continuer en français, mais dans mon esprit, c'est autre chose. Thank you very much for inviting me here tonight. It's a true honor to be at this event. I am the North American delegate for Mondragon. I'm the first one. They're still evaluating whether they want a second one. But I've been doing this for 10 years and learning something new every day. It's a great honor to share the podium with Ken Delaney, who knows more about cooperatives and has forgotten more about cooperatives than I'll ever learn. We have an important message to talk to you about tonight, as the two previous speakers have contributed to. And that is, we are trying to do a couple of things. We're trying to get the right to open the cage so the canary can leave. We're trying to convince the canary it's a good thing to leave. And we're trying to understand the canary if the canary votes to stay. That is a very complicated formula. My fearless and visionary friend Leo Gerard from Sudbury, who is the international president of the Steelworkers, as Ken said, says that the false choice between good jobs and a healthy environment is no longer sustainable. It's not either or, it's all or nothing. Leo says that if we're fortunate and smart enough to create a context where the industrial green economy manufactures commodities of international value to export to reduce our trade deficit through factories that provide good jobs for workers, whose paychecks enable them to support their communities and to buy both domestic and imported goods, then we have to operate by different rules. The Mondragon Steelworker Alliance and collaboration is all about playing by those rules. In the US, we've learned a lot about failed models. We've learned that too big to fail means socializing losses and privatizing profits. We've learned that deindustrialization and disintermediation are not natural creative destructive outcomes. They are not natural creative destruction outcomes. Instead, they are entirely man-made, creative only for those who profit, and destructive for those who are fired, abandoned, foreclosed, and outsourced. We've lost 16 million jobs during the Great Recession in the US to command and control economies whose labor costs are only 3% of ours, and only half of those jobs are ever coming back. Ontario's manufacturing sector employment has fallen from 1.115 million in November 2002, the peak, to 904,000 in October 2008 when the crisis began, to 788,000 in December 2009. Here in Ontario, you lost 115,500 manufacturing jobs during the current recession since January 2008, and a total of 326,700 manufacturing jobs since a decade ago. This is not a good story. We've learned that the holistic cost of abandoning industries and communities is always greater than any offshore marginal labor rate savings. When manufacturing leaves a state or a province, research and development and design invariably follow. The post-internet era teaches us that technology innovation belongs to no particular geography, no particular political boundary or people. Technology innovation fades in and out from literally everywhere, centrifugal as centripetal forces. Today's and tomorrow's white-collar jobs are just as equally outsourceable as factory jobs. So we've learned that culture is more important than ideology. We know that we have to come up with better worker company cultural models than we have in previous economies, or the past will become prologue. We'll end up back at some greenwashed Walmart with everything we buy made somewhere else, under labor conditions none of us would want to experience personally. We see beginnings of hope. Cleveland's Evergreen Cooperatives, which is based on Spain's Mondragon model and supported by progressive funding sources such as the Cleveland Foundation, the Ohio Employee Ownership Center, and the Democracy Collaborative in College Park, Maryland. These kinds of efforts represent practical next-generation blueprints for how the United States working and entrepreneurial classes can shut the door on discredited models and reach for a better way. During last December's White House Job Summit, President Obama talked about virtuous cycle job creation strategies. Virtuous cycles are those measures which engender both employment and economic growth in ways that reinforce each other's upward tendencies. Make no mistake about it, the numbers are with us. The event that we're participating in tonight is one of many, not exactly like tonight's event, but there are many events which show how society is changing right before our eyes. In the US alone, there are 29,000 cooperatives with almost 100 million members. 1 out of every 3 Americans, North Americans, is member of a cooperative. The same in Canada. And there are over $30 billion in assets in those US cooperatives. Almost 11 million employee owners, with about 55% of them, or 11,000 companies, collectively owning the majority of the company in which they work, and approximately 11,500 ESOPs, covering 10 million employees, which is 10% of the private sector workforce. Today, we have over 10,000 credit unions with over $480 billion in assets, serving more than 79 million people in the United States. So in the US and Canada, 1 out of every 3. As Ken mentioned, last October 27th in Pittsburgh, President Leo Gerard of the Steelworkers and Mondragon International President Josu Ugarte announced this collaboration. We were amazed at the press and media response we got, unsolicited. For the press call, Josu called in from Mondragon, which is a small town in Guipúzcoa, which is a province in the middle of the Basque Country of Spain. And Leo went down from his office to the press floor in his building in Pittsburgh. And we had an open mic, and anybody who wanted to call in could call in. We wanted to announce this prior to the White House Job Summit because we wanted to plant a flag way, way far into the quadrant of doing well by doing good, a new model that represented an intellectual leap forward, something beyond the same old that really has not been getting the country forward moving. And we were amazed at the avalanche of press that we received. We were inundated, overwhelmed, consumed. We had articles in the New York Times, Time Magazine, The Nation, the Christian Science Monitor, the McClatchy papers, blogs. We received phone calls from every town on the map. Could we solve the problem? Could we use this collaboration to save the day? This was a humbling, sobering moment because we had an idea and we've been able to put these 2 amazing institutions together. But we are working our way towards a solution, and I want to talk to you tonight in some detail about what we're doing, because we are making progress. But it's important that the progress be rooted in the right philosophical underpinnings and that we not make a mistake. Because if we make a mistake, if there's a false start, then the backward steps that you're pushed never quite compensate for the forward steps you want to make. So what we've tried to do is we first tried to organize the community. We were able to select out of hundreds 50 key advisory, both people and organizations that we formed into an advisory council to make sure that all of us are smarter than any one of us. The collective right idea is the idea that we would follow. Secondly, we did take an initial look at a number of projects from the deluge that we were experienced, and we went back and forth between Pittsburgh and Mondragon in Spain to make sure that we had a similar vision, everybody on the same page. We have had a bit of a breakthrough. LKS is the Mondragon Management Consultancy Co-op. It has never before wanted to come to the United States. It's 450 people, about 50 million in sales. But it does everything a management consultancy would do, but from a Mondragon model, cooperative model perspective, which makes it very unique. And LKS now has agreed to come and co-locate with the steelworkers in Pittsburgh and form a team that will try to induce more and inspire more North American manufacturing competitiveness by understanding, applying, and integrating the Mondragon cooperative model as it may apply in hybrid combinations for U.S. steelworker represented companies. This new model will integrate collective bargaining with Mondragon's cooperative practices, such as having the union's bargaining committee also serve as the social council. The Steelworker Mondragon team will also determine suitable co-investing models using precedents such as the steelworkers' participation in the Quebec Solidarity Fund, which invests back into the greater Quebec community, and the Mondragon Eroski Foundation, which has similar goals and a fully integrated community ownership structure. The next steps will, as I said, start to help companies that need and desire different management restructuring to compete in a different way by helping them to form what we're calling union cooperatives, this new hybrid model. The LKS role will be to insert and structure hybrid union co-op management, consulting experience and expertise. The steelworkers will serve in the role of the social council. LKS and the steelworkers will work as a team to transition these transformed entities into functioning union co-op models that draw maximum advantage from the synergies implicit in a larger cooperative context, which is how the Mondragon model functions. This approach is very similar to the role that LKS plays within the Mondragon Corporation and would replicate how individual Mondragon co-ops interact within the context of the overall Mondragon Corporation. The long-term goal will be hybrid model companies that interconnect to help each other grow and be more productive and proactive in the face of expected market challenges. Ken has already mentioned the 10 principles that govern Mondragon, and most of you come from cooperative experiences and know it just as well as I do, so I won't go into that. But I do want to address, as a final point, one of the most important questions that we are working with, and that is, who pays for this? We are not quite at the genetic place where money grows on trees. I think we're at the genetic place trying to make sure we still have trees. But we do have to pay for things. Mondragon is not a charity. It is a very lean and competitive industrial manufacturing conglomerate in 40 countries with very impressive numbers. It does put the right principles first, but the proof of putting the right principles first is also to demonstrate that you can be profitable, and perhaps more profitable than organizations you compete with that don't put the right principles first. And since the Mondragon worker owners are invested in their own company, it's really a question of taking their money and their lives to the best possible quadrant. So we're in a world where financial predators are roaming the earth. Goldman Sachs has been called out for its role in first taking down a company like AIG, which caused a massive taxpayer-funded bailout, then taking down a country like Greece by providing seductive credit lines that turned into sort of credit crack for company users, and then finally by shorting the United States as a subprime market maker that selectively disclosed its trading position and bet against its own clients. Victims of this greed money trail, America's manufacturing communities have learned the hard way that outsourcing disenfranchises domestic populations, facilitates offshore profit centers and capital flows, and puts self-interested corporate boardrooms in the center of a wealth traffic control matrix only they control. So financing worker ownership conversions remains one of this model's biggest challenges. Approaches include financing workers' ownership share, potential minority share investors, possibly conventional debt financing. Again, the end game is more local empowerment, more local sovereignty, more distributed and equitable skin in the game. We're detecting a lot of interest now from co-ops in getting access to larger pool benefit programs like the health and welfare funds and pension trusts belonging to unions. Both are open to all employees of a company or co-op if a collective bargaining agreement is in place. There is some real near-term potential to do this, starting with small-scale pilot programs. There's also a lot of interest in the banking side, access to capital, as there are a large number of locally based union-related credit unions wanting to invest more in communities through ventures where profits are recycled, not exported. Another steelworker affiliated venture, the Pittsburgh Steel Valley Authority and its newly formed Heartland Capital Institute led by Tom Croft, who, by the way, is author of a recent book called Up from Wall Street that I do recommend, works with other progressive unions and pension funds. These progressive people's capital organizations are designing responsible and profitable investment alternatives that rebuild our economy and infrastructure, reinvigorate our cities, and create highly anticipated green jobs of the future. When ready, we hope that the Steelworker Mondragon Union co-op hybrids might be able to pursue investment alliances whereby pension investors, through various limited partnerships and similar vehicles, might partner with worker cooperatives to build the kinds of projects these factories will produce. The U.S. Department of Energy has also approached the Labor Federation to see if there's interest among pension investors in clean technology investments, with the Department of Energy providing 80% loan or investment guarantees. So, my conclusions. There are natural and historical alliances between the cooperative and labor union movements. Where those have diverged, we believe that now is the moment to bring them back together. With Mondragon's assistance, the steelworkers will seek to implement hybrid worker-owner models in combination with union collective bargaining models in a way that makes workplaces more participatory and more accountable to the workers. A core part of this hybrid approach will be to transform the role of the Social Council into a union bargaining committee. Leo Gerard, during the Steelworker Mondragon collaboration press announcement last October, said that historically, people have looked to co-ops as a means to meet their needs when those in power would not, whether due to profit motives or political motives. Virtuous cycle approaches, such as the union co-op model that empower and re-enfranchise our working classes, will help to mitigate the structural unemployment and ethical challenges we face by funding, developing, and leading the people-centered economy we hope to build in ways that are creative, productive, and just. We've created a domain name, virtuouscycle.coop. Let's people it. Thank you.
Well, these books are called A Century of Cooperation by Ian McPherson, and it seems to me, whether we start with Via Campesino or steelworkers and what we heard in terms of this new partnership, you know, the world is changing and there's evidence. And you will find there's evidence in this room too of the thinking outside of the box, that the kinds of things that you are talking about here. And it seems to me, you know, there was a linkage here between reclaiming the commons, which is what was being talked about, and if we start thinking of human energy and labor and its relationship to capital, you know, we've been experiencing capital enclosure for a long time, and part of your message tonight, it seems to me, is we need and we are part of reclaiming that. And that is what you were talking about, I heard, and economic democracy as being a way of thinking about transforming the way we're currently operating in much of North America. So, you know, it was a pretty interesting way of starting, and I'd like both of you to come and take this book by Ian McPherson, A Century of Cooperation, and I want all of you to join with me in thanking them for helping us think about the next century of cooperation. Thank you very much.